Today's town hall features 3 cybersecurity specialists who provide tips on how to stop cybercrime in its tracks. Today will be the first of 2 town halls we'll have this week. I'm aware that there's some buzzing in the background with folks who are joining us in a second. So like all organizations, charities are vulnerable to scam artists who attempt to carry out fraud and cybercrime. Now more than ever, charities need to be aware of fraud and to take steps to protect their organizations, their donors, and their assets from harm. I'm not sure if our Secretary of State, John Weldon-Smith, is able to join us this morning. Let's see if he's on. Mike, can you tell? I know he wants to welcome you, but I don't see him.
Do not see him at this point either, no.
So the panelist presentations portion of today's town hall will be recorded and will be posted on the Office of the Secretary of State's website under the Charities tab, as will today's PowerPoint presentation. The content and the presentation provided is for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be legal advice. So now I am really thrilled and honored to introduce you to our esteemed panel. So please help me welcome Toby Musser. Toby is the CEO of M&S Group. Over the last 30 years, Toby's professional life has centered around solving problems for businesses alongside great people who use technology as their primary tool. A serial entrepreneur, Toby is CEO of M&S Group, an MSSP, or a managed security service provider that specializes in security and compliance services and is based in our great state of Maryland, where he lives with his wife and business partner, Laura, and their family. The M&S Group has a presence in 400 locations on 6 continents. He is a member of the Baltimore Cyber Range, Hartford Community College Cybersecurity Curriculum Advisory Committee, and has worked on work groups led by our Office of the Secretary of State. And further, Toby leads and serves on various boards in support of causes important to him. Also joining us this morning is Tasha Cornish. She is the Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland, or CAMI, Maryland's only organization solely dedicated to the growth of Maryland's cybersecurity industry. As the Executive Director, she leads CAMI's implementation of educational, programming, community resource development, and cyber career networking opportunities. Tasha has a Master's of Science in Public Health from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and nearly a decade of nonprofit leadership experience with expertise in fundraising, community outreach, data analysis, and partner management. And our third panelist this morning is Chip Stewart. Chip is the Maryland's Chief Information Security Officer. He leads the Office of Security Management within the Maryland Department of Information Technology. The OSM is responsible for the direction, coordination, and implementation of the overall cybersecurity strategy and policy for all state agencies in the executive branch. Mr. Stewart has over 25 years of experience in architecting, implementing, and securing a wide range of communication networks. Chip led the team that developed the Maryland IT Security Manual and was the architect of the secure enterprise architecture that includes security as a service and security operations for 40 Maryland agencies. Without further ado, please help me welcome our first panelist, Tasha. Tasha?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I will admit that we are starting out our moment and our morning together this morning with the kind of doom and gloom part of the presentation, where I share with you about our cyber SWAT team. So I don't have to tell you this morning that the amount of ransomware and breaches that have gone on in this past year and in the past really 2 years has blown up. So in response to this, next slide, please. In response to this, we created our cyber SWAT team. So this was created when we all went, or many of us had the privilege of going, I should say, to remote work last year. And we are prepared to respond and to support businesses in your time of need. We understand that many people don't know where to start when they suspect a breach, but we have a comprehensive team of experts that we have assembled that can help answer your questions based on the needs of your business and scope of the breach. So we have proactively selected from our member companies who have agreed to be SWAT team members, and we will assemble the appropriate team depending on your needs if you do call our hotline. So next slide, please. I want to take this moment to highlight many of our partners on this list, those who are involved across the domains that we'll be speaking about moving forward. So thank you. Many thanks to our member companies. All right, next slide. Thank you. So I want to just talk about the anatomy of a cyber response team. So again, we want a variety of folks on our team. We have our technology providers, and these might be your MSPs or some of your other managed service providers or IT folks who manage your networks and your cloud technologies. So we certainly want them to be a part of the conversation because they are often, those who can help solve the problems that you have. And, oftentimes, sometimes we want to blame those folks, but it's important during the breach that this is nobody's fault. And although it can be, very tempting to do that, they're a really critical part of the response team. Next, we have our cyber providers, a group of which I've shown you already, who can help with some of the investigation and diagnosis of your security problems specifically. You also want to have a communications and PR approach. So we all know what it feels like to be the victim of somebody else's breach, and we don't know about it for months and months and months later. And as charities and as nonprofit leaders, you all know that the trust that you have from all of your stakeholders is key. So having a clear communications and PR plan during this time is really critical. Finally, you want to make sure you have legal and compliance professionals on your response team. So some of us on this call are likely working in regulated industries. So of course you have federal and state regulations that you might have to abide by. And additionally, you might have some other legal obligations. So we're going to talk a little bit further about what this means for your constituents as well as your donors, but it's important to have those ducks in a row. Next slide, please. So if you reach out to us, as mentioned, we will have a free consultation for you within a couple hours, or we try to do it within an hour of being contacted. So we'll assemble a team and give you a call and ask some questions. And then you'll be put directly in contact with CAMI members who will take over the process and support you from there. Next slide, please. So I want to go over the recovery process a little bit because we often get a lot of questions about this. So we also encourage you, even if you are not, if you have not confirmed that you are experiencing a breach, you can always call us even if you suspect something. So what we first do is identify the scope of the breach and employ our team that we've discussed. We also notify and assemble some of those key team members. So again, anybody who knows your networking and anybody who knows the data that might be compromised. So our second step is to contain. So we have professionals who know which steps to do, because oftentimes your team might try to handle the problem on their own. And that can sometimes lead to further data loss and further disruption of your business. So really you want to contain that. You don't want to access systems that the hackers may not have accessed yet. So we want to collect and document evidence that we have and to eradicate the threat before we try to recover. And we want to plan for the notification strategy and damage assessment at this time. The third step is to really notify and report. So this is where you report to your regulators and officials, you open a case with your insurance company, and you assess the legal implications and notifications required. Next step, we work with our professionals to try to recover and restore those systems, to validate, test, and monitor any of the affected systems, and to update your systems based on the event. And last, you want to do that follow-up. So you want to document your root cause analysis and prepare reporting for regulators, legal team, and insurance. And of course, you want to modify and revise any of your internal policies to prevent further breaches. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but I have to mention now that proactivity is certainly your best bet when you're trying to reduce your chances of a breach. So we encourage proactivity, and Toby will speak a little bit about this later. And we also have members of our team that can help you through this process. So would be remiss not to mention it here. Next slide, please. So this is just, again, a quick overview of what happens. So you can visit our website. You can fill out the Cyber SWAT team request form. We will respond and give you a triage team that will give you an hour of free consultation. Then you can we're never going to recommend that you work with only one provider, of course. We'll give you a list of suppliers. And at that point, they'll require or collect any other required information. And you will again follow up with our incident response team. Next slide, please. This is just an overview. If you go to our website, mdcyber.com, and go to the Cyber SWAT team, this is the form you will see. You will click that button, that blue button in the middle of the page. Next slide, please. And this is the form that you'll see. Again, next slide. And different questions you should ask yourself if you believe you're experiencing a breach. Obviously, you know what your business does, but that's something that we will ask. If you already have an attorney or insurance company, we'll want to talk to you about that. We'll want to understand what your current IT looks like, how big your organization is, what you believe the scope of the impact is, if you've had any communication with the hackers, and as well as if you've done anything to attempt to fix it, and of course, who your regulators are. So again, hopefully, throughout the rest of this presentation, you'll learn about how you might be able to avoid this point. But I wanted to share with you a resource that is available if you do ever have to contact our Cyber SWAT team. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tasha. I'm grateful. Let me just ask, if I may, and I'll invite Chip and Toby also to jump in if they have a quick question or two for you, this is a bit more dynamic. What do you think is the better strategy for charities or other organizations? You know, I heard you say if you think there's a breach, do you think that's the time to contact, or do you think it's better to be proactive and approach it before a breach occurs? Yeah,
certainly. Contact us or any of the other, well, Toby on this panel today to talk about your options to be proactive. But if you do suspect something and you don't have a team you're already working with, feel free to reach out to us as well.
Thanks, Tasha. Toby, Chip, any comments?
I would just simply add that one of the biggest determinants of how bad it gets is the time between when you suspect something's happened and when you start containing. So I think to echo what likely Toby and what Tasha said, the speed with which you report and start that containment is a big determinant of how bad it gets. So I think just, again, err on the side of notification.
Great. I would just mention, Tasha, this is such an amazing resource for everybody on the call and for the citizens of Maryland. So please get the word out. This is a lot of hard work that Tasha and the team put into this, and better safe than sorry. Make the call. That's what we would always recommend, and please get the word out, because again, this is such an awesome resource for everybody.
Thanks, Toby.
Yep.
No, Tasha, I'm sorry, we're going to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you.
Okay. So Toby, you're up.
All right. Well, we can skip that slide. We know I'm Toby. All right. So I want to start off with a little story for you guys. For 10 years, I served as the president of the Maryland Center for the Arts, and I'm the immediate past president on the board. And so I've lived my life involved in nonprofits and some public service on the side with other organizations. And a few years ago, we had a really upsetting call come in. An older woman had made a donation, or she thought she had made a donation, and she was looking for a receipt because it was getting close to tax time. And we had no record of that donation. And it turned out that somebody had solicited a donation in the Maryland Center for the Arts name, and she had made a sizable donation, and we were unable to give her a receipt for that donation because we never received it. And it was really, it's very sad, right? We certainly could use the money to further our cause, but she didn't get the tax deduction. And as you can imagine, she was very upset. And this brought to life a conversation within the board and our executive director. And so jump to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So we came to the realization that we really needed to educate our donor base about what it looks like to donate to the Maryland Center for the Arts. And we put some effort into ensuring that we explained on our website how to donate. The board was educated with how to communicate our donation process. And in our emails, we laid out very clearly that solicitations from the Maryland Center for the Arts would always come in XYZ manner, in a certain appearance. And we send out emails on this day. And we actually included a link that showed what our website looks like. Now, certainly the bad guys, they can make things look really real. But educating the donor base and the board, I think, is a critical first step to make sure that your donor base doesn't inadvertently donate to somebody that you do not, that's not supporting you. I would also mention in regards to this particular section, there's an underlying principle here. A friend of mine is in the Secret Service and shared with me that when they're learning to recognize counterfeit currency, they don't put before the agents different versions of counterfeit currency. They make sure the agents really understand what real currency looks like, all of the aspects and security pieces that are built into genuine currency. They don't train them on the counterfeits. They train them so well on what's real that when an agent runs into a counterfeit piece of money, it just really jumps out of them because they're so deeply familiar with what the real thing looks like. And I think if we adopt a little bit of that attitude with our donor base to make sure they're really well educated about what communications with our organizations look like and how we solicit funds and communicate, then it will make it easier for them. It will jump out to them if they receive communication that's anomalous. Next slide, please. All right, so we talked a little bit about training the board and the staff. I just want to reiterate that regular training about things that people feel like they already know is actually really valuable, especially as it relates to the way that you do things in relation to cybersecurity. So a lot of unscrupulous copier vendors and office supply companies will send invoices. We'll talk about that a little more in the next slide. But as we go through this slide, making sure that the board knows that they should never receive invoices or respond to somebody's inquiry about payment. That should always go to the executive director or whoever your team is that handles that. And really making sure that the board is educated about communication with possible vendors, both from a conflict of interest standpoint and a security standpoint. That any inquiries about the business of the organization should always go to the team that manages it, not through the board members. The reason I mention this is often board members are Gen X or older, and some of them aren't as familiar with technology and the way that it works. And so just continual coaching and reminding them to leave the business of the organization to the employees, and the guidance stays with the board. Perhaps even creating policies to hand out to the to the board and the team, reminding them of what your process is that they can keep on their desk or refer to when a question comes up. Could you go to the next slide, please? Yes, so this image, just a reminder here, last year, I'm sorry, it's about a year and a half ago, Google and Microsoft both Facebook received a number of invoices from a company that they did business with. And they paid millions of dollars on these invoices that actually did not go to those vendors. This is something that we're seeing an uptick, especially with nonprofits, where the bad guys are sending invoices to the office that look legitimate and may even have the name of a company that you're doing business with. It's important that if you're going to pay an invoice and talk to your executive management and all the way down to the bookkeepers, invoice payment should always go through a multi-person approval process, and the destination of the payment should never change without a thorough review. If the address changes, the bank routing number changes, if the amount of the invoice is slightly off, even by a penny, pick up the phone, have a conversation. Don't pay the invoice until you're really sure that it is a proper invoice, because as we all know, working in the nonprofit world, money is difficult to come by. It takes a lot of effort. And so we want to keep that money where it needs to be, in your bank account. All right, next slide. I want to talk a little about your insurance. You may be having insurance renewals coming up where they're asking questions about your IT or your technology. I want everybody to be aware that when you fill out your insurance form as part of a nonprofit, you're filling it out as a legal entity. That means in sort of a legal terms, you're making what's called an attestation. You're swearing that what you're putting on that form is true and accurate. This is different than when you fill out your home insurance or your car insurance form personally, where it's called to the best of your knowledge. If you get it wrong, they may still pay. If you put the wrong information out on your insurance form, for instance, if you say you back up every day, and maybe you back up every week, or you say you have antivirus and it's actually not there or turned on, or you don't have documentation, or you say you use multi-factor authentication, you get texts when you log in or some message, and you don't actually do that. When the time comes to file a claim, you may find that your insurance won't pay out for you. So be very careful when you fill out insurance forms when it's related to technology and cybersecurity, and take the extra time to talk to your technology team. And you may even find that these forms are instructional as to what needs to be communicated to the board and the executive director to budget for the proper practices, procedures, and policies that need to be in place. Next slide, please. Okay, so the data indicates everybody's going to have a breach at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's when. So you want to be ready. And Natasha alluded to this in those preparation slides, but you really want to understand from your insurance company what they're going to require from you to pay out on a claim. And as part of your incident response plan, you want to perhaps tabletop it. Get together with your lawyer, your insurance company, if you have a PR person, the appropriate board members, your technology partner, and just go through it in an afternoon. What are you going to do? What's your plan? Who's going to talk to who? So that you are ready, and it's not quite the panic that tends to ensue if you haven't prepared. So we definitely recommend walking through it. Next slide. All right, I'm coming up on the end of my time here. I'm sorry, I don't want to abuse Chip here, so I'll go a little bit faster. But I want to remind you that in our world, everything is a computer, by and large. The conference room computer, the TV stick, if you have a Roku, or your watch, your phone, your tablet, all these things are computers that require updates and usually have regular security updates. So you want to make sure you're updating all the things, not just your computer. When updates come out, you want to try to do them as soon as you reasonably can. I skipped the first bullet. I'll beat it to death a little bit. If you have policies and practices, procedures, you want to make sure you're constantly reviewing them with the team, at least quarterly. But some of the best-in-class companies have a monthly 5-minute stand-up where they go, hey, here's our plan. If there's a cyber incident or a cyber issue, talk to this person first. Turn off your computer. They go through whatever their policy is, just to keep it top of mind with the team. I would highly recommend that you engage with some technology provider to monitor your systems and ensure that they're patching, a company that gives you reports so that you have that data for the insurance company to validate or prove to them that you're doing the things that you've said you're going to do. And some of the oldies but goodies, lock your office when you leave, lock your computer. Conference rooms often leave computers logged in. Log them out or turn them off or lock the door. Little tiny things like that are all little steps that increase your security. Additionally, last bullet point on this slide, really talk to the board members. Make sure your board knows that they need to update their computers and all of their things, because they are an avenue of communication that is highly trusted. And if a board member's security is abrogated and they start sending communications to the team, it could lead to a further expansion of a breach because of the trust that's naturally given to a board member. All right, I think I've said enough there. I just want to remind you one more time, do a tabletop, run through it, talk through it, and see that your system works. And with that, thank you very much for your time. I'll turn it over to Chip.
Thanks, Toby.
Well, thank you, Toby, and thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone, and good morning. Today, my portion of the presentation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to kind of pull a single thread, and it's going to start off kind of doom and gloom because cybersecurity is a very serious topic. But my hope is by the end of the conversation today, a little bit more light, and we realize that, hey, this isn't as bad as it could be, and I think we have a lot of opportunity to move things forward. So I'm going to start out kind of covering a little bit about what threats are, go into a little bit of detail about the different kinds of threats and threat actors. We'll speak about the specific charity threats and then end with what you can do to help protect your charity and your organization. So next slide, please. So there's a couple of technical terms that I want to take a moment to describe. The first is threat sources. And in cybersecurity, most people are focused only on adversarial threats. So these are people attacking your systems and your organization. There are also accidental threats, structural threats, and environmental threats. So these are all things that can cause a negative action for your organization. The focus today with what I'm going to speak about is just the adversarial threats. And a threat source initiates a threat event. So in the context of that could be a scan of your network, a phishing email, or any sort of other action that the threat source takes in an attempt to exploit a vulnerability, which is just a weakness in your system. All systems have weaknesses. Every single one out there, there's nothing that's impermeable. If they're successful in exploiting that vulnerability, it has an impact. The most common one that we talk about in cybersecurity, the one that's throughout the news, is ransomware. But there's a bunch of other threats you have to be concerned about: extortion, financial crimes, other business disrupting activities. So when we talk about the threat sources, I think it's important to break them down. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can use motivation as a mechanism to break them down, capability, how competent they are. The ones you hear a lot about are nation states, right? So they're focused on a geopolitical impact. Espionage, so theft of sensitive information, destruction, and then financial goals. Criminal gangs are almost exclusively focused on financial goals. So they may steal information, they may deploy ransomware, they may execute denial of service attacks, but those are all typically with the end goal of getting money from an organization. And then the last group are hacker groups and individuals that are unaffiliated with groups. And their motivations are typically wide-ranging and far less focused. This could be what's called hacktivism, which is using computer hacking for activism purposes. Could be revenge, could be gaining notoriety, financial gains. And then there's a category of threat actor that transcends all of these different groups. Next slide, please. And that's adversarial insiders. So adversarial insiders can be working individually, they can be working with a criminal gang, or they could be motivated or recruited by a nation state. I want to differentiate here and just take a second to talk about the difference between adversarial and accidental insiders, because I think that while some of the controls you put in place cover both of them, I think there's a really important distinction to be made here. Accidental insiders may click on a phishing link in an email. They may accidentally do something to reveal information or load malware into your network. But adversarial insiders are acting with intent. They're working with someone that has the capability to really understand and target the attack. Where the motivation for adversarial insiders used to be disgruntled employees, now there's much more of a financial incentive. And this is demonstrated through a couple of things that have happened recently. The two most well-known, Tesla had a employee who at a bar had an individual approach him and said, "Hey, I will pay you $500,000 if you load ransomware onto the Tesla network." So this wasn't a virtual introduction. This was a extraordinarily sophisticated and targeted attack. They were planning to launch ransomware. Fortunately, the Tesla employee did what was important, what was appropriate, which was report it. Through that, they were able to eventually capture and arrest the criminal. In August of this year, someone reached out to a security company called Abnormal Security via email, and they reached out to a bunch of employees and said, "Hey, we will pay you a portion of our proceeds from ransomware if you load ransomware into your organization's network." Fortunately, this was a security company, so they did all the great stuff to kind of understand what the bad guys were doing. So I think we're seeing kind of a shift now, shift in motivation, shift in capabilities, whereas a disgruntled insider used to have generally limited capabilities. Most people don't have the level of sophistication required to develop ransomware or malware. Very frequently, the outcomes used to be data thefts. They would steal customer lists or other internal proprietary information. Now we're talking about real significant cybersecurity incidents. And I think it's important to note that as things have evolved, the insiders now include your vendors at times. So your managed service providers, your IT contractors, all of these organizations that are inside of your network are now insiders that could be a threat. So how do we maintain awareness of these issues? For the next slide. Information sharing. And I like to emphasize the word sharing. That's the operative word here, because it's a bidirectional relationship. There's organizations called ISACs. ISAC stands for Information Sharing and Analysis Center. They share information, so things called indicators of compromise or observables. These are technical items like IP addresses, email subject lines, file hashes, and file names and things like that. But then also here are the techniques, tactics, and procedures that the bad guys are using. They allow you to ask community questions. Hey, have you guys seen this thing? Or, hey, when this happens, how do you guys handle this? A lot of community contribution through them. So, hey, here's a best practice that we've developed, or hey, here's a tool I'm going to make available to the community at large to help. it was kind of interesting here. I found that there's not actually charity-specific ISACs. So through some research and kind of outreach, I believe that the retail and hospitality ISAC is likely the most appropriate for charities to use, because those are the ones that are focused on consumer-facing information. So I would say that joining and collaborating with the ISACs can help tremendously. And I'll share a story about this. It's a very recent one. We recently saw an attempt to extort that used a bomb threat. So there are common extortion schemes that use information about, hey, we've been reading your email, we think you're involved in a crime, we've seen you do stuff that you shouldn't be doing. But this one is kind of a new thing, and we haven't seen it before, and it was a extortion based on a bomb threat with a very low payout. So they set a very aggressive timeline. We need payment immediately, and had the threat of death and destruction. We reach out to the ISAC community, and no one else had seen this before. So we were the first ones to see this, which is now becoming an emerging trend. So it's very interesting how to leverage the ISACs. Again, hey, have you guys seen this before? And hopefully, if you're the first, other folks now know, hey, this is something we should be on the lookout for. And I think this applies to charities as well, because I suspect that while governments and other organizations see different things, I think charities have a different set of threats and schemes that get used. I think Toby mentioned one earlier about impersonating to get donations. For charities, I think there's an opportunity for these to become big news. Blackbaud, which is an organization that helps out charities, is now involved in multi-district litigation, combination of 28 class action lawsuits, last I checked. So I think one of the things to consider with cyber threats for charities is first order and second order and third order impacts. With all the multi-jurisdictional requirements, it's even more important. You have theft, which has a direct impact financially on the mission, but then second order impact of reduced income to use for the organization's goal. The data breach one is interesting as well, because when you have a data breach, you have notifications and breach response, which is costly. You follow that with potential for loss of generosity all around. If I am a victim of identity theft through a charity, I may choose to be less generous in the future. And I think then that there's a third order effect there, which is that if my data gets stolen, the bad guys now know I'm a charitable person and may attempt to use that to further defraud me by impersonating charities that I might be associated with. So I think that there's a lot of risk that we need to be aware of, but I think using the resources like ISACs gives the ability to share that information and hopefully stay in front of the bad guys. Next slide. I had one more, so I'll just speak to it here. So just in addition to what Toby and Tasha mentioned, and it's not an important slide, so don't worry about it. In addition to what Toby and Tasha mentioned, I try to leave folks with 3 recommendations. Adopt and implement a cybersecurity framework, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework. One of Tasha's slides pointed that out. The cybersecurity framework is a free tool that you can use to help protect your organization. I think joining and collaborating with an ISAC to help contribute to your organizational risk management. And lastly, have a third party conduct periodic risk assessments to ensure that you're taking the steps you need to protect your organization. And with that, I think I've gone well over my time, so I apologize. Thank you all. And back over to you, Kathy.
Thank you, Chip. I appreciate it. So just a couple of questions. You actually, you couldn't have ended on a better note there, Chip, because Just last week, the U.S. federal courts declared open season on its own website. You probably heard about this. So they're rolling out a new policy to allow cybersecurity researchers to test for vulnerabilities to strengthen their defenses against malicious actors. And it's really their part of a broader adoption across federal agencies. So I guess my question is, how would a charity, particularly smaller charities, larger ones who have IT departments, certainly may have the infrastructure, but how would a charity go about employing a recommendation, Chip?
I think leveraging community resources like those through CAMI is a great place to start. Cyber skills are A, they atrophy, and B, they take a long time to get. And I think one of the risks that smaller organizations have is they have the jack of all trades. So you have somebody who's the PC repair guy, and he also manages the firewall, and he gets additional tasking to do risk management. And these skill sets are different enough that while he or she can probably produce a product that looks like a competent risk assessment, I think that what will eventually be found is that the product might not meet the needs of the organization. So again, leveraging the resources through the commercial community is important.
I would, if I could add to that, talk to your insurance company. Many insurance companies with the policies have some discounts for some security services, so you may find discounts or free options there. Additionally, the Bill Gates Foundation funds an insurance company for nonprofits. The name just escaped me, but if you Google it, you'll find it. And they actually provide some assistance too. They're also a fantastic place to get insurance if you're a nonprofit. So your insurance company may have recommendations. I know as an IT company, my insurance company actually did an assessment of me before renewing, and they had several tools that they make available that I know are available for nonprofits at all. So may have a low cost or no cost option with your insurance company.
Thanks, Toby. Tasha, anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I think that's a great suggestion. There are a lot of tools that I learn about new ones every day that the insurance company offers either free or at reduced price for its
Thanks so
members.
much. Toby, you mentioned the breach that you experienced while at the Maryland Center for the Arts and your education for the board. Since this town hall is targeted to charities, can you talk a little bit, please, about getting the board on board, if you will, regarding cybersecurity and potential fraud and crime, and of course the experience you had?
So I want to clarify that the Maryland Center for the Arts didn't experience a breach. A donor did.
Oh, pardon me. Yes, thank you for that.
A donor had what we would maybe in the business world call business email compromise of sorts. So that is what kicked off the conversation. So the educational activities that we went through were very similar to what I reviewed in this cause, ensuring that people update their own equipment. When your phone has an update, if you're an Apple person, you probably get a little more obvious notice. Some Android devices don't tell you as much, so you may want to take the time to have everybody know how to check for an update on their system, and maybe put it on your calendar to update your home computer or your home router, your TV even. So just that cadence becoming part of daily life, like making your morning coffee or sending a birthday card to a relative, put it on your calendar for certain things to just check and make sure they're up to date. That's how we kind of approached it, to just make it part of the living, breathing of life with technology. And we did really push that the board should not be involved in the business of the organization as far as invoices, talking to vendors. If they want to make an introduction, they should, at the most send an introduction email and let the team that runs the daily business handle those interactions and relationships. So there's no confusion about what appropriate interactions are as far as billing or invoices and things like that.
Thanks, Toby, and thanks for the clarification. I'm going to open it up now to our participants this morning and ask if you have any questions.